What's going on, guys? I'm Mr. Green, and today I'll share with you how I've built my first PC and how I've chosen my parts. Make sure to stick to the end because I'll share some tips that I'm sure will be handy when you decide to do it yourself. To start picking your parts, you'll need to know what you will use that computer for and set your budget. If you're going to browse the internet, you don't need $200 computer with 16-core processor and top-of-the-notch graphics card. It is also the other way around. If you want to game at high refresh rate, you shouldn't buy a $300 brand new computer with a crappy GPU. Now I'll go through each part I have chosen it. Take note that if you have different parts than I do, the build process is basically the same, so this tutorial could still help you out. First, let's go through the components of the computer. Let's start with the CPU. I've chosen the AMD processor because they are affordable compared to Intel, which is the other major CPU manufacturer. Intel's CPUs are slightly better, but in my opinion they are not really worth it. And also, you can upgrade AMD CPUs to a newer generation one without swapping a motherboard, since they use the same M.2 socket. So, my processor of choice is AMD Ryzen 7 2700X. It has 8 cores and 16 threads, clocked at 3.7 GHz and boost clock of 4.3 GHz on a single core. It comes with right Prison cooler that I am going to use in this build. I've got it brand new from a local retailer for $200, which is now, 9 months later, still a good price. Despite a deal that I got for it, I've decided to get it because I want to edit 4K videos for this YouTube channel and video rendering is very CPU intense. Speaking of that, video editing takes a lot of RAM. For this purpose, I got 32 gigs of DDR4 3200 MHz Corsair Vengeance LPX memory, which I got for $130. I got it in 2x16GB sticks because most motherboards, including mine, have 4 DIMM slots for your RAM sticks, so I have 2 slots extra if I want to upgrade in the future. Keep in mind that you will lose a lot of performance if you put only one RAM stick in, so just get 2 for example. If you want 16 gigs, then you should buy 2 exact same model 8 gig sticks. You should not buy 2 RAM sticks with different speeds, latencies or capacities. So, if the main purpose of your build is gonna be gaming, then rather go for Ryzen 5 processor and 16 or even 8 gigs of RAM and invest the difference into a better graphics card. It will better affect your gameplay. Speaking of graphics cards, at the time of purchasing parts, my choice was NVIDIA GTX 1070. It has 8 GB of dedicated video memory. I got it for $200. I decided for it since I game only occasionally, but I do not really care for that FPS about 100 since I'm using a 60Hz monitor. At this price point, I will recommend NVIDIA's newer 16th generation, although the main difference will benefit streamers only because 16 and 20 series GPUs have dedicated video encoding chip that takes the load of encoding your live stream of the CPU. That means that your processor should be 100% dedicated to your game, which gives you some extra FPS. Now let's talk about motherboards. Every motherboard that has AM4 socket is compatible with Ryzen, but you might need to update BIOS, although most of the previous generation AM4 motherboards have already updated BIOS and are ready to use with 3rd generation of processor, of course if you buy that brand new. So, my choice is ASUS X470 Prime Pro motherboard. It has an X470 chipset, although you'll be good with any other AM4 motherboard. I decided to go for it mainly because of aesthetics. I got it brand new from eBay for around $120. For storage, I wanted to have fast 500GB SSD, that's why I've chosen Samsung 970 EVO Plus 500GB M.2 NVMe disk. It's a bit overkill and you should be fine with just 2.5-inch SSD, which to admit they are better bang for the buck. I got my M.2 SSD for $100. To power everything, I've decided to go for Corsair's 850W 80+ gold rated power supply. It has plenty of power for your computer and with 80+ gold rating uses a bit less energy compared to 80+ bronze rated PSUs. I got it for $80. To put everything in, I've chosen Kolnik Observatory white case. It has 4 pre-installed RGB fans, tempered glass side and front panels to see into your computer. It has a dust filter on the top and at the power supply's fan. I got it used for $40. When you're buying your case, you should look for size. You want to make sure you can fit all your components in it and airflow. If the case has bad airflow, your computer will get very hot and parts will start to downclog themselves in order to prevent any damage, and if needed, computer will even shut down. Before jumping into the building process, please consider subscribing and dropping a like button. Comments will also be appreciated. Before we start, you should get your PSU out of the box, plug it in, turn it on and touch the metal housing of it to get the static electricity that might destroy your components when you touch them out of view. You should build your PC on a hard, non-metallic surface. I don't recommend standing on a carpet while building it. Get a Phillips head screwdriver. Let's start with the building process. First, you need to unbox your motherboard, CPU and CPU cooler. In the motherboard box, you will get manual SATA cables for connection for your 2.5 and 3.5-inch hard drives, tiny screws for M.2 disks, and also I/O shield. Put your motherboard on top of the motherboard box. Then you need to identify a CPU socket. It will not be too difficult. You need to pull the lever up and identify a tiny triangle on the socket and align it with the golden triangle on the edge of the CPU and gently put the CPU in the socket. Make sure to be gentle and do not touch the underside of the processor on which are golden pins because you can break them. Then just lower the lever back to its original place. If you have Intel processors, the process is more or less the same. Just do not bend the pins in socket and you should be alright. Then you should install your memory. Check the motherboard manual to see in which slots to put it in. Then you just push those levers on the side of the slots. You might need to do it on both sides of the slot or just on one. That varies from motherboard to motherboard. Make sure DIMMs are properly aligned with the notches in the socket and push RAM in. When you hear a click, RAM is properly installed. Then you should install the CPU cooler. The installation process varies from cooler to cooler, so make sure to read cooler's installation manual. Before you install it, check if there is any thermal paste pre-applied. If it's not, you will have to apply it on the CPU before you put cooler on. In case you use Red Prison cooler, which has thermal paste already on, you just need to align it straight on the socket. Make sure that the lever is on the top side of the motherboard. When everything is aligned as shown in the video, then you just need to pull the lever down. It's gonna feel like something is going to break, but everything will be alright. Then connect CPU cooler's fan to the same named connector, which is usually on top of the motherboard, but just to make sure, check your motherboard's manual. If you have M.2 SSD, then you should install it next. To install it, you have to remove M.2 heatsink, then put the disk in and screw it with that tiny screw that you got in the motherboard box. Now, I strongly recommend to fully assemble the computer outside the case. You just need to open the top PCI Express slot to install your graphics card and connect power supply cables to components. You need to connect 8-pin CPU power connector to the motherboard at the top, 24-pin at the side, and PCI Express power to graphics card. You need to connect a monitor to the graphics card, turn on power supply, and then you should short 2 pins for front panel connectors that are labeled power. Refer that to the motherboard manual. If the computer turns on and you get a picture on the monitor, that means it's working. Now short those same 2 pins again with a screwdriver until the computer turns off again. Now you will turn PCU off again. Disconnect its cables from motherboard and graphics card. Remove the graphics card the same way you put it in and bring out your case. You should put in the power supply with the fan facing down and screw it in with screws that you got with your case. You need to put an I/O shield in and make sure it clicks when you install it. Then you need to make sure that standoffs included in the PC case line with all the holes on the motherboard. Then put the motherboard in the case and secure it by screwing it in motherboard standoffs. Then mount your SATA drives as it is stated in your case's manual. Then you should connect your front I/O connectors, your USB 3.0, 2.0, power and reset switch, and HD audio. For this, refer to the manual of your motherboard. Now you should connect SATA drives to your motherboard by the cable that is included with the motherboard. To locate your SATA ports on the motherboard, you should look in the motherboard manual. You should also connect your fans to a case, fan headers on the motherboard, or a fan hub, whatever fans require, for example standard fan connector, Molex connector, or to its fan specific connector. Now is the right time to install any extra fans, RGB strips if you have them. You connect your LED strips to the RGB header on the motherboard. For installing your graphics card, you need to remove necessary PCI Express covers, so you could get access to graphics card I/O. Everything else is like before. When you have built it outside the case, push the tiny lever down, align GPU with PCI Express slot, gently push it in until you hear a click. Then screw back those screws that you removed with PCI Express covers to secure it in place. Now, everything that remains is to connect the power. Like outside the case, you need to put the same cables in the same socket as before. 8-pin CPU at the top, 24-pin motherboard at the side, and PCI Express in your GPU. You also need to connect SATA power cables to 2.5 and 3.5 drives. Then you just turn on the power supply, connect your monitor to the graphics card, push the power button on the case, and computer should turn on and post, like in the build outside the case. Also, now it's time to connect your keyboard and mouse to the USB ports. Now everything that remains is to install Windows 10 and drives. To install Windows, you would need a 8GB USB stick, which will get formatted during that process, so make sure files on it are backed up. Then you have to download the Windows Media Creation tool from Microsoft's website on the USB. Once that process is finished, you just plug that USB drive in your freshly built computer and turn it on. Windows installation should begin automatically. You should just follow what the installer says you to do. For drivers, you should just download them from the website of your parts manufacturer and follow the installation process. For more details, please check other videos on YouTube. Now, the tips that everyone has been waiting for. Links to all websites mentioned are in the description. Before you start picking parts, you should go to a website called PCPartPicker to check your parts compatibility, to see your components prices and other details. To pick the right power supply for your parts, you should go to a web power supply calculator. It might be obvious, but to reduce your PC's price, you could buy parts used. If you inspect the parts carefully and make sure that they are working properly before you buy them, everything should be alright. The only thing that I would not buy used is my main storage drive. Now, before I give a bonus tip, make sure to drop a like and subscribe. When you're building your PC and turning it on for the first time, make sure that power supply is turned on and that monitor's input is set to the port that your new computer is connected to. These tips should save you a ton of time and unnecessary frustration. I hope that you've enjoyed the video, found it useful, and see you in the next video. Bye!